The telegram had arrived 3 weeks late, and by the time Hope Harlow read the words scrawled across the yellowed paper, her sister had already been missing for 2 months in the Colorado Territory. Hope stood on the dusty platform of Leadville, her traveling trunk at her feet, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rutted Main Street, and felt the first tremor of real fear settle into her bones. She had come all the way from Philadelphia in the autumn of 1879, traveling by train and stage coach through landscapes that had grown progressively wilder. And now she stood in this mining town perched at 10,000 feet, breathing thin mountain air that made her dizzy and searching for a sister who had vanished without a trace. The telegram had been brief, impersonal, sent by Hannah's employer at the boarding house where she had worked as a cook. Hannah had left one morning in early August, heading toward the surrounding mining camps to deliver meals, and simply never returned. The marshal had organized a cursory search, found nothing, and declared the matter beyond his jurisdiction since she could have wandered into any number of remote valleys or gotten lost in the sprawling wilderness that surrounded Leadville on all sides. Hope hefted her smaller bag, leaving the trunk for later retrieval, and walked down the crowded street past saloons already filled with miners spending their wages, past mercantile stores advertising everything from pickaxes to French champagne. Leadville was a boomtown, swollen with silver wealth and all the chaos that came with sudden fortune. Men outnumbered women 10-1, and Hope felt the weight of curious stares as she moved past knots of rough-looking prospectors. She kept her chin up, her gray traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of dust, and pushed open the door of the marshal's office. The marshal was a tired-looking man with silver hair and a mustache that drooped past his jawline. He listened to Hope's inquiry with the patience of someone who had heard similar stories too many times before. "Miss Harlow," he said gently, "I remember your sister. Good woman, hard worker, but she disappeared 2 months back and the trail's cold as stone. We looked for near a week, checked all the camps within a day's ride, found nothing. I am sorry, but in country like this, when someone vanishes, they usually stay vanished." Hope felt her throat tighten. She would not just leave. Hannah had plans. She was saving money to open her own restaurant. "She wrote me letters every week and then they just stopped." The marshal nodded sympathetically. "I understand your distress, but without more to go on, I cannot justify another search. We have our hands full keeping peace in town. If you want my advice, you should head back east. This is no place for a woman alone." Hope left the office with her hands trembling, not from fear but from anger. She would not go back to Philadelphia without answers. Hannah was the only family she had left after their parents had died in a factory fire 3 years earlier. They had survived that loss together, had built new lives from the ashes, and Hope would not abandon her sister to the wilderness without exhausting every possibility. She found the boarding house where Hannah had worked, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. The landlady, a stout woman named Mrs. Patterson, confirmed the marshal's story but added one detail that made Hope's pulse quicken. Before she disappeared, Hannah had been talking to Quincy Whitmore quite a bit, Mrs. Patterson said, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "He runs a cattle ranch up in the high country, brings beef down to sell to the mining camps. Nice fellow, respectful. He had taken to eating here most days, and I got the impression he was sweet on your sister. After she vanished, he came around asking questions, looked real torn up about it. He organized his own search party with some of his ranch hands, spent near 2 weeks combing the valleys. Found nothing, but he tried harder than anyone." Hope committed the name to memory. "Where can I find this Mr. Whitmore?" His ranch is about 15 miles north of town, up in the valley below Mount Elbert. But you cannot just ride up there alone, miss. The trail is rough and there are mountain lions and bears. You would need a guide. Then I will hire one, Hope said, Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Quincy comes to town every Thursday to sell beef. That is tomorrow. You can find him at the stockyard near the north end of town, early morning. If anyone can help you, it is him. He knew this country before the silver boom, worked as a scout for a spell. If there is anything to find, he would be the one to help you look. Hope thanked her and secured a room for the night, spending the evening pacing the narrow confines and staring out at the mountains that rose like serrated teeth against the darkening sky. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, her sister had disappeared. The thought of Hannah lost, hurt, or worse made sleep impossible. Hope lay awake listening to the sounds of the boomtown outside, the distant piano music from saloons, the occasional gunshot, the constant rumble of ore wagons moving through the streets even at night. Morning came cold and sharp, frost coating the windows. Hope dressed in her most practical clothing, a wool skirt and jacket that would offer some protection against the mountain chill, and walked through the nearly empty streets to the stockyard. The sun was just cresting the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke and cattle. She found the stockyard without difficulty, a large corral filled with several dozen head of cattle. 3 men worked among the animals, and Hope immediately knew which one was Quincy Whitmore. He stood a head taller than the others, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who worked hard every day of their lives. He wore a dusty black hat, a worn leather vest over a blue workshirt, and moved among the cattle with easy confidence. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw covered in a few days of stubble, and when he turned in her direction, she saw eyes the color of slate, intelligent and watchful. Hope approached the corral fence, her heart hammering. This man might be her only real chance of finding Hannah. One of the other ranch hands noticed her first and nudged Quincy, who looked up from examining a steer. His expression shifted from surprise to something more guarded as he walked over to where she stood. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep, with the slow cadence of someone who chose his words carefully. "Are you Quincy Whitmore?" Hope asked. "I am. My name is Hope Harlow." "Hannah Harlow was my sister. I was told you knew her, that you searched for her after she disappeared." Something flickered in Quincy's eyes, pain maybe, or old guilt. He glanced at his ranch hands, then climbed over the fence with athletic grace and gestured for Hope to follow him away from the noise of the stockyard. They walked to a quieter spot near a water trough, and he removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that fell past his collar. "I knew Hannah," he said quietly. "She was a fine woman. I am sorry about what happened. The marshal told me the search turned up nothing, but I cannot accept that. I need to find her, even if it is only to know what happened. Mrs. Patterson said you know this country better than anyone. I am asking for your help." Quincy ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "Miss Harlow, I spent 2 weeks searching every valley and canyon within 30 miles. I checked old mine shafts, abandoned camps, talked to every prospector I could find. There was no trace of your sister. It is like she vanished into thin air." "Then help me search again," Hope said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "Please, you are the only person who seems to have cared enough to truly look. I will pay you whatever you ask." "I do not want your money," Quincy said, his tone firm but not unkind. "That is not the issue. The issue is that searching that country is dangerous, especially with winter coming on. We have maybe 6 weeks before the first big snows, and once that happens, the high passes become impassable. and I am not sure what we could find that was not found before." "I cannot go back without trying," Hope said, meeting his gaze. "Hannah is all I have. If you will not help me, then I will search alone, but I am not giving up." Quincy studied her for a long moment, and Hope saw him weighing options, considering risks. Finally, he sighed and settled his hat back on his head. "You would get yourself killed wandering those mountains alone," he said. "I cannot have that on my conscience. I will help you, but we do this smart. We will need supplies, good horses, and we will need to plan a route that covers the most likely areas. And you will follow my lead out there. The high country does not forgive mistakes." Relief washed through Hope so intensely she felt lightheaded. "Thank you. I will follow whatever instructions you give. I need to finish up here, sell these cattle. Meet me at the livery stable on Grant Street at noon. We will get you properly outfitted and leave at first light tomorrow." Hope agreed and spent the morning purchasing supplies under the guidance of a grizzled store clerk, who seemed amused by her determination. She bought sturdy boots, heavy wool trousers that scandalized the clerk's wife, extra blankets, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the intense mountain sun. By the time she met Quincy at the livery, she felt more prepared, though her stomach churned with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Quincy had brought 3 horses, his own large bay gelding, a sturdy paint mare for Hope, and a pack horse loaded with supplies. He examined Hope's purchases, nodded approval, and spent the next hour teaching her the basics of handling the paint mare, whose name was Rosie. "You have ridden before?" he asked as Hope struggled into the saddle. "In Philadelphia in city parks," Hope admitted. "Nothing like this. You will learn fast or get sore trying," Quincy said, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Rosie is gentle, but you need to stay alert. She will follow my horse most of the time, but if she spooks, keep a firm hand on the reins." They spent the remainder of the afternoon going over the route Quincy had planned, using a hand-drawn map spread across a bale of hay. He showed her the areas he had already searched, marking them with X's, and indicated new territory he thought worth exploring. Hannah was last seen heading toward the Independence mining camp, about 12 miles northeast of here, Quincy explained, his finger tracing a line on the map. She was delivering food, a route she had done dozens of times, but she never made it to Independence. "I searched the main trail thoroughly, found nothing. But there are side valleys, old prospector camps, places someone could have wandered if they got lost or confused. We will check those systematically." "You think she might still be alive?" Hope asked, voicing the question that had haunted her every moment since receiving the telegram. Quincy met her eyes, and she appreciated that he did not offer false comfort. "I honestly do not know. 2 months is a long time in the wilderness, but I also know people have survived longer. Until we find evidence otherwise, we keep looking." That night, Hope returned to the boarding house but slept little. Her mind raced with possibilities, with hope and dread tangled together. She thought of Hannah, of their childhood together in Philadelphia, of the way her sister had always been the brave one, the one who had decided to head west to seek opportunities when they had nothing left in the city. Hannah had written such excited letters about Leadville, about the mountains and the possibilities. And now she was gone. The morning arrived cold and gray, with heavy clouds hanging low over the peaks. Hope met Quincy at the livery as planned, dressed in her new practical clothing. He looked her over and nodded approval. "You will do," he said. "Just remember, if the weather turns bad, we turn back. No arguments. These mountains can kill you faster than you would believe." They rode out of Leadville as the town began to stir, heading north on a trail that climbed steadily into the high country. The landscape was breathtaking and harsh in equal measure. steep slopes covered in pine and aspen, rocky outcroppings thrusting up through the thin soil, and everywhere the sense of immense space and isolation. The trail was narrow in places, skirting precipices that made Hope's heart race, and Quincy led them with the confidence of someone who knew every twist and turn. They did not talk much that first day. Hope focused on staying in the saddle, adjusting to the rhythm of the horse and the demands of the altitude. Her head ached from the thin air, and her thighs burned with the effort of maintaining her seat. Quincy glanced back frequently to check on her but said nothing, letting her manage. They stopped for a brief lunch beside a rushing stream, and Quincy pointed out the route Hannah would have taken toward Independence. "The main trail is over that ridge," he said, "but there are a dozen places someone could have gotten turned around. A sudden fog, a spooked horse, or just taking a wrong turn where the trail forks. I checked the obvious spots, but I was working alone back then. With two of us, we can cover more ground." "Tell me about her," Hope said. "About how you knew Hannah." Quincy was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I started eating at the boarding house about 4 months back. Your sister was always friendly, made everyone feel welcome. She had this way of remembering what people liked, asking about their day, made the place feel less lonely. I started coming by more often, and we would talk after the meal rush died down. She told me about Philadelphia, about you, about wanting to open her own place. She was smart, ambitious. I admired that." "Were you courting her?" Hope asked gently. Quincy's jaw tightened. "I was working up the courage to ask permission to. Then she vanished, and I have been tearing myself apart wondering if I could have prevented it somehow, if I had been with her that day, or if I had convinced her to quit that delivery route." "You cannot blame yourself," Hope said. "Hannah made her own choices." "Knowing that does not make it easier," Quincy replied. They continued riding, entering a narrow valley carpeted with golden aspen trees that shimmered in the breeze. Quincy led them off the main trail, following fainter paths that wound between rocky slopes. He stopped frequently, dismounting to examine the ground or peer into thick stands of trees. Hope watched him work, impressed by his thoroughness, the way he read the landscape like someone reading a book. As the afternoon wore on, they checked 2 abandoned prospector camps, finding nothing but empty fire rings and rotting canvas. The second camp had clearly been deserted for years. The wooden frames of sluice boxes collapsed and overgrown with weeds. "I found a campsite last time that looked more recent," Quincy said as they rode away from the ruins. "I want to check it again, see if there is anything I missed. It is another hour ahead." The clouds thickened as they traveled, and a cold wind began to blow down from the peaks. Hope pulled her jacket tighter, grateful for the wool and the extra layers she had bought. Quincy noticed her discomfort and slowed the pace slightly. "We will make camp soon," he called back. "There is a good spot near those rocks ahead, sheltered from the wind." They reached the spot as the first drops of cold rain began to fall. Quincy moved with practiced efficiency, setting up a canvas lean-to, gathering deadwood for a fire, and unpacking supplies. Hope tried to help but felt clumsy and useless, her fingers numb with cold. Quincy noticed her struggling with the bedroll and gently took over. "Sit by the fire," he said. "Get warm. You will learn the camp routine, but first day is always the hardest." Hope obeyed, huddling close to the flames as Quincy finished the setup. He produced a coffee pot from the packs and soon had strong coffee brewing. The smell alone made Hope feel more human. When he handed her a tin cup filled with the steaming liquid, she wrapped both hands around it and took a grateful sip. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. I know I am slowing you down." Quincy settled onto a log across from her, his own cup in hand. "You are doing fine. Most city folks would have given up before we left the livery. You have grit. I will give you that. Hannah always said I was stubborn, Hope replied, managing a small smile. Stubborn can be a virtue out here, Quincy said. He stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. I meant what I said earlier. Your sister was special. In a place like Leadville, where most people are just passing through, chasing silver and not much else, she had real substance. She cared about building something lasting. I respected that. She wrote about you, Hope said quietly. Not by name, but she mentioned a rancher who came by the boarding house, said he was different from the miners. She said you actually listened when she talked about her dreams. Quincy looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. She wrote about me, in her last letter, about 3 months ago. She said she thought maybe this territory could become a real home, that there were good people here despite all the chaos. Something passed across Quincy's face, emotion he quickly controlled. I wish I had told her how I felt. I kept thinking there would be time, that I should not rush things. And then she was gone. They sat in silence for a while, the rain pattering against the canvas above them, the fire crackling. Hope felt an unexpected connection to this quiet, serious man who had cared for her sister. He carried his grief privately, but she could see it in the set of his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes. Quincy heated beans and salt pork for dinner, simple fare but surprisingly good. They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Quincy showed Hope how to properly secure the food supplies to keep animals away. He checked the horses, making sure they were comfortable and tethered securely, then returned to the fire. You should get some sleep, he said. We will start early tomorrow. The campsite I mentioned is about 2 hours from here, and I want to search the area thoroughly. Hope nodded and retreated to her bedroll under the lean-to. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came slowly. She lay listening to the rain and the wind, thinking about Hannah somewhere in this vast wilderness, and found herself praying to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost coating everything in white. Hope woke to find Quincy already up, the fire rebuilt and coffee made. Her entire body ached from the previous day's riding, muscles she had not known existed screaming in protest. She forced herself up, not wanting to appear weak, and accepted the coffee Quincy offered. Sore? He asked. Extremely, Hope admitted. It will get worse before it gets better, but you will adapt. Eat something, then we ride. They broke camp efficiently, Hope learning the routine by watching Quincy. Within an hour they were back on the trail, climbing higher into the mountains. The altitude made every breath a conscious effort, but the scenery was spectacular, ridge after ridge of peaks stretching to the horizon, valleys filled with dark green forest, and the sky an impossible shade of blue. The campsite Quincy had mentioned was tucked into a small clearing beside a creek. As they approached, Hope could see the remains of a fire ring and what looked like deliberately stacked rocks forming a crude windbreak. Quincy dismounted and walked the perimeter slowly, studying the ground. Hope followed, watching as he knelt beside the fire ring and sifted through the ashes. This was recent, he said. Within the last month or so, someone stayed here maybe multiple times. Could it have been Hannah? Hope asked, her heart beginning to race. Maybe. Or it could have been any number of prospectors or travelers, but I want to search the area more thoroughly. They spent the next 3 hours combing the surrounding forest. Quincy moved in widening circles from the campsite, examining trees for marks, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Hope searched as well, though she felt less confident about what she should be looking for. It was Hope who found the first real clue. She had wandered about 50 yards from the campsite, following the creek upstream, when she noticed something blue caught in the branches of a fallen tree near the water. Her breath caught as she pushed through the underbrush to reach it. Quincy. She called, her voice sharp with excitement. He appeared within seconds, moving through the trees with surprising speed. Hope pointed to the object, and he carefully extracted it from the branches. It was a torn piece of fabric, blue cotton, faded but clearly from a dress or apron. Hannah had a blue dress, Hope said, her hands trembling. She wore it in the photograph she sent me, the one taken at the boarding house. Quincy examined the fabric carefully. It has been here for a while, but not as long as 2 months. The color would be more faded. This might be from 4 to 6 weeks ago. So she was here, Hope said, feeling tears threaten. She was alive, at least for a while. Maybe, Quincy cautioned, we should not jump to conclusions, but it is the first real lead we have had. We need to search this area more carefully, see what else we can find. They worked until late afternoon, expanding their search radius. Quincy found what he thought might be the remains of a small shelter, branches arranged in a deliberate pattern against a rock face, though it was hard to be certain. They found no other pieces of fabric, no other clear signs of Hannah's presence. As the sun began to sink toward the peaks, Quincy called a halt. We will camp here tonight, continue searching in the morning. If your sister was here, she might have left other signs we have not spotted yet. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating a dinner of hardtack and dried beef, Hope felt a confusing mixture of hope and fear. The fabric suggested Hannah had been alive weeks after her disappearance, but it also raised troubling questions about where she was now and what had happened to her. If she was lost, Hope said, thinking aloud, why did she not try to get back to Leadville? This campsite is not that far off the main trail. Someone with sense could have found their way back. Quincy poked at the fire with a stick, his expression troubled. I have been thinking about that. There are a few possibilities. She could have been injured, unable to travel far. She could have been disoriented from a head injury or from altitude sickness. Or, he paused, seeming reluctant to continue. Or what? Hope pressed. Or she was not alone. Maybe someone brought her here, kept her here. The implication hung in the air between them. Hope felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. You think someone took her? I think we cannot rule it out. There are rough men in these mountains, prospectors who have been alone too long, outlaws hiding from the law. Most are harmless, but not all. If someone took your sister, they might have brought her to a remote camp like this. But then, where is she now? Hope asked. That is what we need to find out. They sat in silence for a long time, each lost in thought. Hope noticed how the firelight played across Quincy's features, highlighting the strength in his face, the care and concern evident in his eyes. He had not needed to help her, could have simply told her the search was hopeless and sent her on her way. Instead, he had committed himself fully to finding answers, driven by his own need for closure and by something else. Something Hope was beginning to recognize as genuine care for her well-being as much as Hannah's memory. Why did you become a rancher? Hope asked, wanting to break the heavy silence. Quincy looked up, seeming surprised by the question. After the war, I did not want to go back east. Too many memories. I came out to the territories, worked as a scout for a spell, then saved enough to buy land and start a small herd. The ranch is not much, but it is mine. I like the work, the independence, and the country up here. It gets into your blood. You were in the war? Hope asked. Enlisted when I was 17, fought with Sherman through Georgia, saw things no one should have to see. The ranch is my way of building something instead of destroying. Life instead of death. Hope heard the weight of old pain in his words. Hannah and I lost our parents in a fire. I understand about wanting to build something new to create life after loss. Your sister told me about the fire, Quincy said quietly. She said you were the one who kept going when she wanted to give up, that you found work for both of you and kept the rent paid. She admired your strength. Hope felt tears prick at her eyes. We kept each other going. That is what family does. It is also what makes losing someone so hard, Quincy said. When they are part of who you are, losing them feels like losing a piece of yourself. They talked late into the night, sharing stories about their lives, their losses, their hopes. Hope found herself drawn to Quincy's quiet strength, his thoughtfulness, the way he listened with complete attention. She understood why Hannah had been interested in him. He was unlike anyone Hope had known in Philadelphia, lacking the polished manners of city men, but possessing a deep integrity that needed no polish. The next morning, they resumed their search with renewed determination. Quincy led them higher into the mountains, following a faint trail he said was used by prospectors heading to remote claims. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, and several times they had to dismount and lead the horses through difficult passages. Around midday, they encountered another traveler, an old prospector leading a heavily laden mule. He was a gnarled man with a white beard stained yellow from tobacco, and he eyed them with the suspicion of someone who had been alone too long. Quincy raised a hand in greeting. Afternoon. Name is Quincy Whitmore. We are looking for information about a missing woman. The prospector spat tobacco juice onto the rocks. Do not know nothing about no woman. She disappeared 2 months ago, heading from Leadville toward the Independence camp. About this tall, brown hair, probably wearing a blue dress. Have you seen anyone matching that description? The old man's eyes narrowed. Might have. What is it worth to you? Quincy's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. There is no reward if that is what you are asking. But if you know something that could help us find her, it would be the decent thing to tell us. The prospector studied them both for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. I saw a woman about 6, 7 weeks back, up near Trout Creek above the timberline. She was with another fellow, tall, skinny guy with a scar on his face. They had a camp set up in the rocks. I kept my distance because the fellow looked unfriendly, if you catch my meaning, but the woman looked scared, I will say that. Hope felt her pulse quicken. Scared how? Like she wanted to run but could not. The fellow kept a hand on her arm, real possessive-like. I minded my own business and moved on, figured it was not my concern. Where exactly was this? Quincy demanded. The prospector gave them rough directions to a valley about 10 miles farther north. But I am warning you, that fellow looked dangerous. Had a gun belt and the eyes of someone who has killed before. You go up there, you best be careful. They thanked the prospector and pushed on immediately, despite the lateness of the hour. Quincy set a hard pace, and Hope could see the tension in his shoulders, the set determination in his face. They were getting close to answers, she could feel it. They made camp that night at the edge of the valley the prospector had described. Quincy was quieter than usual, checking and rechecking his rifle and pistol. Hope noticed he slept with the rifle within arm's reach. Tomorrow, he said before they turned in, I want you to stay back. If this fellow is as dangerous as the prospector suggested, I cannot risk you getting hurt. I did not come all this way to hide, Hope objected. I am not asking you to hide. I am asking you to be smart. If Hannah is being held against her will, we need to approach carefully. Rushing in could get people killed. Hope reluctantly agreed, though every fiber of her being wanted to rush up that valley and find her sister immediately. They moved out at first light, leaving the horses hobbled near a stream and proceeding on foot. The valley was narrow and rocky, with a small creek running through the center and steep walls on either side. Quincy moved with the careful stealth of someone used to tracking, and Hope tried to follow his example, stepping where he stepped, avoiding loose rocks that might clatter and give away their position. About a mile up the valley, Quincy suddenly held up a hand and dropped to a crouch. Hope did the same, her heart pounding. Ahead, partially hidden by a cluster of large boulders, she could see a crude shelter made of canvas and pine branches. A thin stream of smoke rose from a fire. Quincy motioned for Hope to stay put, then began moving closer, using the rocks for cover. Hope watched, hardly breathing as he crept forward. She could see the tension in his body, the way his hand rested on his pistol. A man emerged from the shelter, and Hope's breath caught. He was tall and thin, just as the prospector had described, with a livid scar running down the left side of his face. He carried a rifle casually in one hand and looked around the valley with the watchfulness of someone expecting trouble. Quincy froze behind a boulder, completely still. The scarred man lingered outside the shelter for what felt like an eternity, smoking a cigarette and scanning the rocks. Finally, he ducked back inside. Quincy remained motionless for several more minutes, then carefully withdrew, making his way back to where Hope crouched. "He is alone right now," Quincy whispered. "I did not see your sister, but there are supplies for more than one person. She might be inside the shelter or she might be somewhere else." "What do we do?" Hope asked. "We wait and watch. We need to know the situation before we make a move. If he has your sister and she is alive, we cannot risk him using her as a hostage." They spent the rest of the day concealed in the rocks, taking turns watching the camp. The scarred man emerged several times but always alone. He seemed nervous, frequently checking the approaches to the valley. Hope began to fear that Hannah was not there, that they had followed a false lead. Then, as the sun began to set, a second figure emerged from the shelter. Hope nearly cried out before Quincy's hand clamped over her mouth. It was a woman, but as Hope's eyes adjusted, she realized with crushing disappointment that it was not Hannah. This woman was older, with dark hair shot through with gray, and she moved with the defeated posture of someone who had given up hope. Quincy's grip on Hope's shoulder tightened. "That is not your sister," he breathed in her ear. "But that woman is clearly not there by choice. Look at her wrists." Hope looked and saw what Quincy had noticed. Even from a distance, she could see dark marks around the woman's wrists like rope burns. The woman moved slowly and the scarred man watched her constantly, his rifle always within reach. "We need to get the authorities," Hope whispered. "By the time we ride back to Leadville and return with the marshal, that fellow will be long gone," Quincy replied. "We need to act now. The two of us against an armed man, that is suicide." "Not if we are smart about it." Quincy's eyes were hard, calculating. "Wait here. I am going to circle around, come at the camp from the other side. When you hear me call out, I want you to stay down but be ready to help that woman run if things go wrong." "Quincy, this is too dangerous." He met her eyes, and she saw both determination and fear there. "I let your sister disappear without doing enough to find her quickly. I am not going to let another woman suffer if I can prevent it. Trust me." Before Hope could argue further, he was gone, moving with surprising silence through the rocks. Hope's heart hammered as she watched the camp, watched the scarred man and his captive moving about their evening routine. The woman was preparing food while the man sat cleaning his rifle. Minutes stretched like hours. The sun sank lower, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red. Hope gripped a rock in her hand, feeling foolish but needing something solid to hold on to. Then Quincy's voice rang out across the valley, clear and commanding. "Federal Marshal, drop your weapon and step away from the woman." It was a lie, a bluff, but it worked. The scarred man jerked upright, his rifle clattering to the ground as he spun toward the direction of Quincy's voice. For a moment, everything froze. Then the man's hand dropped toward the pistol at his belt. "Do not do it," Quincy shouted, and Hope saw him now, positioned on a rocky outcrop about 30 yards from the camp, his rifle aimed at the scarred man's chest. The angle and position gave him a clear advantage. The scarred man's hand hovered over his pistol. Hope could see him calculating odds, weighing options. The woman had dropped to the ground, covering her head with her arms. "There are 3 of us," Quincy called out, reinforcing the bluff. "You are surrounded. Your only chance is to surrender peacefully." The scarred man's shoulders sagged. Slowly he raised his hands. "Do not shoot. I am unarmed. Kick the pistol away from your belt, slowly." The man complied, using his foot to dislodge the gun belt and send it skittering across the rocky ground. Quincy descended from his perch, rifle never wavering, and Hope took that as her signal to emerge from hiding. The scarred man's eyes widened when he saw her. "You said 3. "I lied," Quincy said flatly. "Now get on the ground, face down, hands behind your back." The man hesitated, and Hope saw murder in his eyes. He was weighing his chances, considering whether he could rush Quincy before being shot. Quincy must have seen it too. "Try it and you are dead before you take 2 steps, Quincy said, his voice cold as winter. "I have killed men before. Do not make me do it again." Something in Quincy's tone convinced the scarred man. He sank to his knees, then prostrated himself on the ground. Quincy approached cautiously, keeping his rifle trained on the man's back, and used a length of rope from the camp to bind the man's hands securely. Hope rushed to the woman, who was still huddled on the ground. "It is all right," Hope said gently. "You are safe now. We are here to help." The woman looked up with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Is he really a marshal?" she asked in a whisper. "No, but we will get you to one. Can you stand?" With Hope's help, the woman got to her feet. She was shaking violently, and Hope wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Quincy had secured their prisoner to a sturdy pine tree and was searching the camp. He emerged from the shelter with a grim expression. "There is another woman's belongings in there, a bag with the initials HH sewn into it." Hope felt her knees go weak. "Hannah's. That is Hannah's bag." "Where is she? Ask him where she is." Quincy turned to the bound man. "You had another woman here. Where is she?" The scarred man sneered. "I do not know what you are talking about." Quincy crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and grabbed the man by his shirt collar, hauling him partially upright. "I asked you a question. There are belongings here belonging to a woman named Hannah Harlow. Where is she?" "She ran off," the man spat. "About 3 weeks ago. Stupid girl waited until I was asleep and took off into the mountains. Probably dead by now." Hope felt hope and horror collide in her chest. Hannah had been here, had been held by this man, but had escaped 3 weeks ago. She could still be alive, somewhere in these mountains. "Which direction did she go?" Quincy demanded. "How should I know? I tracked her for half a day but lost the trail near Leadville Creek, give up and came back." The woman they had rescued spoke up, her voice trembling but determined. "He is telling the truth about that much. The other girl, Hannah, she talked to me when he was not listening. She was planning to run. She said she knew these mountains a little from her delivery routes, thought she could find her way back to Leadville if she could just get away from him. She made her move about 3 weeks back during a rainstorm. He was furious when he woke up and found her gone." "Why did he take you both?" Hope asked. The woman's face crumpled. "I was traveling with my husband. We were heading to California. We camped in the wrong place, and she gestured to the scarred man, "he killed my husband and took me. I do not know how long I have been here. Weeks, maybe longer. I lost track of time." Hope felt rage and pity in equal measure. She looked at Quincy, saw the same emotions reflected in his face. "We need to get her to Leadville," Quincy said. "And we need to organize a proper search for Hannah. If she escaped 3 weeks ago and knew the general direction, she might have made it somewhere safe. Or she might be lost and hurt," Hope said. "We will find her," Quincy said with conviction. "We know a lot more now than we did. We know she is a fighter, that she was alive 3 weeks ago, and we know the area where she was last seen. That is more than we had before." They made the scarred man walk ahead of them, hands bound, as they navigated back to where they had left the horses. The rescued woman, who said her name was Alina, rode double with hope, clinging to her with desperate gratitude. They traveled through the night, Quincy pushing them hard, wanting to reach Leadville as quickly as possible. They arrived at dawn, exhausted and covered in dust. The sight of Quincy riding into town with a bound prisoner, 2 women, and a pack horse caused an immediate stir. The marshal came running from his office, and soon a crowd had gathered. Quincy explained the situation quickly and efficiently. The marshal took custody of the prisoner, his face darkening as he heard Alina's story. "We will see this man hangs for murder and kidnapping," he promised, "and we will organize a search party immediately for the other woman." Hope wanted to leave immediately, but Quincy insisted they eat and rest for a few hours. "We will be no good to Hannah if we collapse from exhaustion," he said firmly. "The search party will need time to organize anyway. We will leave this afternoon with fresh horses and more men." Hope reluctantly agreed, and Mrs. Patterson took both her and Alina in, providing hot baths, food, and clean clothes. Alina told her full story to the marshal, describing how the scarred man, whose name was apparently Silas Crow, had attacked several prospectors over the past months, robbing them and, in at least 2 cases, killing them. He had developed a pattern of taking isolated travelers, stealing their goods, and leaving their bodies hidden in remote valleys. "He kept saying he was going to take me to California, sell me to some associates he had there," Alina said, her voice shaking. "He talked about Hannah the same way. Said she was young and pretty, would fetch a good price. But Hannah fought him constantly. I think he was growing tired of dealing with her, which is probably why he did not try harder to track her down when she ran. Easier to just keep me and find someone else later." The thought of her sister enduring such treatment made Hope physically ill, but it also filled her with fierce pride. Hannah had fought back. She had escaped. She was out there somewhere, and Hope would find her. That afternoon, a search party of 8 men assembled, including Quincy, the marshal, and several experienced trackers. They rode out toward the valley where Leadville Creek ran, the area where Silas Crow claimed to have lost Hannah's trail. Quincy led them to the creek, and the trackers fanned out, searching for any signs of passage. The creek ran through a narrow gorge with steep sides, the water running fast and cold with snowmelt from the peaks above. One of the trackers, a leathery old mountain man named Dutch, found the first sign. "Here," he called, pointing to a muddy section of bank. "Boot prints small, probably a woman. 3 weeks old, give or take." They followed the creek downstream, finding occasional signs that someone had passed this way. A broken branch here, a disturbed pile of rocks there, boot prints in soft soil. The trail was faint, almost lost, but the trackers worked with patient expertise. As the sun began to sink, Dutch called another halt. She was following the creek, probably using it as a guide. Smart thinking. But there is a fork up ahead where 2 creeks meet. If she took the wrong branch, she could have ended up miles from Leadville in rough country. "What would be the right branch?" Hope asked. "The East Fork leads back toward the main valley and Leadville. The West Fork climbs into the high country, dead ends in a box canyon below the Continental Divide. No way out except back the way you came." They pushed on to the fork, arriving as darkness fell. The marshal called a halt for the night, and they made camp at the junction. Hope could barely contain her frustration. Hannah could be anywhere, and every hour they waited was another hour she might be suffering. Quincy seemed to sense her mood. He sat beside her at the fire, handing her a cup of coffee. "We will find her," he said quietly. "How can you be sure? Because she is like you. She has grit, determination, and because we are not giving up." Hope met his eyes, saw the sincerity there, and felt something shift inside her. Over the past days, Quincy had become more than just a guide or helper. He had become someone she relied on, someone whose presence steadied her. She found herself noticing small things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled, the careful gentleness of his hands when tending the horses, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. "I am glad you are here," she said softly. "I do not think I could do this without you." Quincy looked away, but not before she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "I need to find her too," he said. "Not just for closure, but because I could not live with myself if I did not do everything possible. And because," he paused, seeming to struggle with words, "because you matter to me, Hope. I have known you only a few days, but I have watched you face fear and exhaustion and disappointment without breaking. You are extraordinary." Hope felt her breath catch. There, in the firelight with the mountains rising dark around them, something unspoken passed between them. It was too soon, too complicated, with Hannah still missing and the outcome uncertain. But Hope recognized the feeling blooming in her chest for what it was. Before she could respond, Dutch called from the edge of camp. "Got something here. Looks like someone built a small fire maybe 2 weeks back." Everyone rushed over. In a protected hollow near the East Fork, partially hidden by rocks, were the remains of a fire ring. Dutch sifted through the ashes. "Definitely not old," he confirmed. 2 weeks, maybe a bit more, and look here." He pointed to marks on a nearby rock, scratches that could have been made by a knife or sharp stone. The marks formed letters, crude but deliberate. HH. East. Hope felt tears spring to her eyes. "Hannah." She left a message showing which way she went. The marshal nodded with satisfaction. "That is a clever woman. She knew someone might come looking eventually." She took the right fork toward Leadville. They set out at first light, following the East Fork with renewed energy. The terrain was challenging, the creek running through a series of small canyons and steep-sided valleys, but the trackers found signs that someone had passed this way. More boot prints, disturbed vegetation, and at one point a strip of blue fabric tied to a tree branch like a marker. "She is definitely trying to leave a trail," Dutch said with approval. "Girl has a good head on her shoulders." They followed the creek for hours, the valley gradually widening as they descended in altitude. Then, as they rounded a bend, Dutch suddenly raised a hand and pointed ahead. "Smoke," he said. "Campfire smoke, maybe a mile ahead." Hope's heart leaped. They approached cautiously, not knowing who they might find. The smoke led them to a small meadow where a prospector's cabin stood, a rough log structure with a stone chimney. A horse was tethered nearby, and smoke rose from the chimney. Quincy and the marshal approached the cabin door, hands on their weapons. Quincy knocked firmly. "Who is it?" A woman's voice called from inside, thin with fear. "My name is Quincy Whitmore," Quincy called back. "I am looking for Hannah Harlow. We mean no harm." There was a long silence, then the sound of something heavy being dragged away from the door. The door cracked open, and Hope caught her breath. Hannah stood in the doorway, thin and pale, wearing a tattered dress that had once been blue, her brown hair tangled and her feet wrapped in makeshift bandages. But she was alive, and when her eyes found Hope in the group, they filled with tears. "Hope," Hannah's voice cracked. "Is that really you?" Hope pushed past the marshal and Quincy, reaching her sister in 3 strides. They collided in an embrace, both sobbing, holding each other with desperate strength. "You are alive," Hope kept saying. "You are alive." "I thought I was going to die out here," Hannah said, her words tumbling out between sobs. "I thought no one would ever find me." They moved inside the cabin, and Hannah told her story. After escaping from Sela's crow during the rainstorm, she had run blindly through the night, driven by pure terror. She had gotten lost, wandered for days, surviving on creek water and a few supplies she had managed to steal from Crow's camp. She had found this abandoned prospector's cabin about 10 days ago and had been sheltering here, too weak and injured to travel further. Her feet were badly blistered, and she had lost weight dangerously, but she had survived. "I kept thinking about you," Hannah said to Hope. "About how you always told me to never give up, no matter how bad things got. That kept me going." The marshal examined Hannah and declared that while she needed a doctor's care, she would recover fully. They made a travois to spare Hannah from having to ride and began the journey back to Leadville. During the trip, Hannah asked about how they had found her. Hope told the story, with Quincy filling in details. Hannah listened with wide eyes, and Hope saw her sister looking between them with growing understanding. "You came all the way from Philadelphia," Hannah said quietly to Hope. "You did not give up." "Of course not," Hope replied. "You are my sister." Hannah then looked at Quincy, who rode nearby. "And you? Mrs. Patterson told me you had been asking about me, but I had no idea you organized search parties. I thought you were just being friendly." Quincy met her eyes. "I care what happens to good people," he said simply. "I am glad you made it out." That night they camped one last time before reaching Leadville. Hannah was asleep almost immediately, exhausted but safe. Hope sat by the fire with Quincy, neither speaking for a long time. Finally, Hope broke the silence. "What happens now?" she asked. "After we get back to town?" Quincy poked at the fire with a stick. "I suppose you and your sister will head back to Philadelphia, start rebuilding your lives." "What if I told you I did not want to go back?" Hope said, surprised by her own words. "What if I told you that these past days, despite everything, have made me feel more alive than I have in years?" Quincy looked at her, surprise and hope warring in his expression. "These mountains are not easy," he said carefully. "Life out here is hard, especially for women. There are not many comforts." "I did not come west looking for comfort," Hope replied. "I came looking for my sister, but I found something else too. I found that I am stronger than I thought. And I found," she paused, gathering courage, "I found someone who makes me want to stay." Quincy set down his stick and turned to face her fully. "Hope, I do not want you making decisions based on gratitude or emotion from all this. What we went through, it creates bonds, but those do not always last when you return to normal life. You think that is what this is for me?" Hope challenged. "Gratitude? I do not know. I hope not, because I have been half in love with you since you stood in that stockyard and told me you were going into the mountains with or without my help. You have your sister's courage, but you also have something else, a gentleness, a kindness. I see the way you are with people with a leaner with your sister. You care deeply and you act on that care. That is rare." Hope felt her heart hammering. "Then what is stopping us from seeing where this might lead?" "Nothing," Quincy said quietly. "If you truly want to stay, if you think you could build a life out here, then I would like very much to see where this leads. But I want you to be sure. Talk to your sister. Make sure this is what you really want, not what you think you should want." Hope nodded, though she already knew her answer. She had found something in these mountains beyond her sister. She had found a sense of purpose, of capability, of home. They reached Leadville the next day to a hero's welcome. News of Alina's rescue and Hannah's recovery had spread, and the town turned out to greet them. A doctor examined both women and declared them malnourished and exhausted, but fundamentally sound. Alina had family in Denver who were telegraphed, and arrangements were made for her journey home. Over the next weeks, Hannah recovered her strength under Hope's care at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. The sisters talked for hours, sharing everything that had happened. Hannah listened to Hope's growing feelings for Quincy with a knowing smile. "I thought there might be something special about him," Hannah said. "I am glad you found each other, even if it took my disappearance to make it happen." "Do you mind?" Hope asked. "I know you had feelings for him." Hannah shook her head. "I liked him, and I think in different circumstances something might have developed, but what I felt was attraction and respect. What you two have, that is something deeper. I can see it in how he looks at you, how you light up when he visits. Do not let my history with him stop you from being happy." "What will you do?" Hope asked. "Will you stay in Leadville?" Hannah thought for a long moment. "I still want to open a restaurant, but maybe not here. Too many bad memories. I have been thinking about Denver. It is growing fast, needs good places to eat, and it is far enough from these mountains that I can start fresh. What about you?" "Quincy has asked me to visit his ranch," Hope said, feeling a flutter in her stomach. "He wants me to see what life would really be like before I commit to anything." "Then go," Hannah said firmly. "See his world and hope. I think you have already made your decision. I can see it in your eyes. You are just making sure it is the right one." Hope visited Quincy's ranch the following week, riding up with him into the high valley where his property lay. The ranch was modest, a sturdy log house with a barn and corrals, maybe 300 head of cattle grazing in the meadows. But the setting was breathtaking, surrounded by peaks, with a clear creek running through the property and aspen groves that glowed gold in the afternoon sun. Quincy showed her everything honestly, not hiding the hard realities. The isolation, the harsh winters, the constant work. But Hope saw beyond the challenges to the possibilities. She saw the garden that could be expanded, the house that could be made more comfortable, the community of other ranchers who looked out for each other. "I can see myself here," she said as they stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "If you will have me." Quincy turned to her, his expression serious. "I want you to be absolutely certain. I cannot offer you the life you had in Philadelphia. No theaters, no libraries, no city comforts. You can offer me something better," Hope replied. "A partner, a purpose, a home built on honest work and shared dreams. That is what I want." Quincy reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "Then I am asking you properly. Hope Harlow, will you marry me? Will you build this life with me?" "Yes," Hope said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They married 6 weeks later in late October 1879 in a simple ceremony in Leadville with Hannah and a few close friends in attendance. Eleanor had traveled from Denver to attend, bringing her brother and his family, and Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony. Hannah stood as Hope's witness, and as Hope spoke her vows to Quincy, she saw her sister smiling through tears. After the ceremony, Hannah pulled Hope aside. "I am so happy for you," Hannah said. "You deserve this." "So do you," Hope replied. "Promise me you will find your own happiness in Denver." "I will," Hannah promised, "and I will visit often. We did not survive everything we survived just to lose each other now." The sisters embraced, and Hope felt the circle of her life completing itself. She had come west looking for Hannah, had found her against all odds, and in the process had discovered a new version of herself. Stronger, braver, more capable than she had ever imagined. Quincy and Hope settled into married life at the ranch, and Hope discovered that she loved the work and the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to ride well, to help with the cattle, to keep the ranch books. She expanded the garden and learned to preserve food for the long winters. She made friends with the other ranch wives, who met monthly for quilting and conversation. The first winter was hard, with snow piling higher than Hope had ever seen, isolating them for weeks at a time. But those weeks of isolation also brought them closer together. They talked for hours by the fire, learning each other's thoughts and dreams, building the foundation of their partnership. Spring came with explosive beauty, the meadows carpeting with wildflowers, and Hope felt herself bloom along with the land. She loved this life, loved the challenges and the rewards, loved the man she had chosen. Hannah visited that spring, arriving with news that her restaurant in Denver was thriving. "I am calling it Hannah's Place," she announced, "and I am doing well. The city is growing so fast and people are hungry for good food and a welcoming atmosphere." "I am so proud of you," Hope said, hugging her sister. "And I am proud of you," Hannah replied. "Look at what you have built here. You are positively glowing." Hope laughed. "Actually, there might be a reason for that. I am pregnant." Hannah squealed and embraced her sister again. "When?" "Late summer, the doctor thinks. We just found out last week." Quincy was both excited and terrified about becoming a father. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate patterns of mountains and aspens, and set about making the house safer and more comfortable for a baby. Their son was born in August of 1880, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Samuel, after Quincy's father who had died in the war. Hannah came to visit when Samuel was a month old and stayed for 2 weeks, helping Hope adjust to motherhood and falling in love with her nephew. "He has your determination," Hannah observed, watching the baby fight sleep with furious intensity. "Poor Quincy. He is going to have his hands full." Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and work, of challenges met and overcome. Hope discovered talents she had never known she possessed. She became known in the ranching community as someone who could help with difficult births, both animal and human. Her steady calm and practical knowledge making her a valued resource. She started teaching the children of neighboring ranches to read and write, holding lessons in her kitchen during the winter months. Quincy expanded the ranch gradually, buying adjacent land and increasing the herd. He hired 2 ranch hands who built their own cabins on the property, and the ranch became a real operation, respected throughout the valley. 3 years after Samuel's birth, Hope delivered twins, a boy and a girl. They named them James and Rose, and the house rang with the noise and chaos of 3 young children. Quincy proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving, teaching his children about the land and the animals with the same care he had shown Hope when teaching her to ride. Hannah visited twice a year, always bringing news from Denver and the wider world. She had found love too, marrying a banker named Robert who appreciated her business acumen and supported her restaurant ambitions. She opened a 2nd location and then a 3rd, becoming one of Denver's most successful businesswomen. The sisters remained close despite the distance, writing long letters and treasuring their visits. Their children grew up knowing each other as cousins, and the bonds between the 2 families remained strong. Eleanor also stayed in touch, sending Christmas cards and occasional letters. She had remarried to a kind widower with 3 children and had found peace in helping raise his family. She often wrote that Hope and Quincy's rescue had given her a second chance at life, and she was determined to make the most of it. As for Silas Crow, he was tried, convicted, and hanged for murder and kidnapping. His execution brought closure to many families of prospectors who had disappeared in the mountains, though it could never fully heal the wounds he had caused. Years passed, measured in seasons and harvests, in children growing and learning, in the slow accumulation of a life well lived. Hope watched her children thrive in the mountain air, becoming strong and capable, learning the values of hard work and integrity from their father. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quincy took Hope up into the high meadows where they had spent part of their search for Hannah all those years ago. They left the children with one of the ranch hands and rode into the mountains, retracing some of the paths they had followed. "You ever regret it?" Quincy asked as they sat beside a creek, watching the water tumble over smooth stones. "Leaving Philadelphia, choosing this life." Hope leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid comfort of his presence. "Not for a single moment. This is where I was meant to be. With you, with our children in these mountains. Coming here to find Hannah, I found myself. I found home." "I think about what might have happened if you had never gotten that telegram," Quincy said. "If Hannah had never disappeared, would we have met?" "I think so," Hope said. "Maybe not then, maybe not that way, but I believe some people are meant to find each other. We were meant to be together." Quincy kissed her forehead. "I love you, Hope Whitmore. You made me believe in second chances, in building something good from tragedy. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just surviving." "We gave each other those things," Hope corrected. "That is what partnership means." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the play of sunlight on water, listening to the wind in the pines. Hope thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and determination that had driven her into these mountains, the unexpected love she had found along the way. She thought about Hannah, now successful and happy in Denver, about Alina, who had rebuilt her life from ashes, about all the women who carved out lives in this hard territory through sheer force of will and courage. And she thought about herself, the Philadelphia girl who had become a ranch wife, a mother, a teacher, a healer. She had become someone she never imagined she could be, and she had done it by being willing to venture into the unknown, to face fear, to trust in her own strength. As the sun began to sink toward the peaks, they rode back down to the ranch, back to their children and their life together. Hope looked at the house they had built, the corrals full of cattle, the garden she had cultivated, the swing Quincy had hung for the children from the big cottonwood tree, and felt a deep contentment. This was home. Not because it was easy or comfortable, but because it was real, built on honest work and genuine love. She had come looking for her sister and found so much more. She had found herself, her strength, her capacity for love. She had found Quincy, her partner in every sense of the word. And she had found a place where she belonged, where her children would grow up strong and free, learning the same lessons these mountains had taught her. That night, with the children asleep and Quincy working on ranch accounts by lamplight, Hope sat by the window and looked out at the stars blazing in the clear mountain sky. She thought about writing to Hannah, about sharing her thoughts and feelings, but decided some moments were too full for words. Instead, she simply sat in the quiet satisfaction of a life well chosen, surrounded by the evidence of love and work, grateful for the telegram that had arrived all those years ago. The one that had seemed like the worst news imaginable, but had actually been the beginning of everything good. The mountains stood eternal outside her window, the same peaks that had seemed so threatening and alien when she first arrived, now familiar as old friends. They had witnessed her transformation, had tested her and found her worthy, and now they stood as silent guardians of the life she and Quincy had built. Samuel stirred in his sleep in the next room, and Hope went to check on him, tucking the blanket more securely around his growing frame. He was 10 now, already helping his father with the ranch work, showing the same quiet competence that marked Quincy's every action. The twins were 7, Rose already showing signs of her mother's determination, and James his father's thoughtfulness. Hope checked each of her children, touching their hair gently, marveling at these lives she and Quincy had created together. Then she returned to the main room where Quincy had finished his accounts and sat waiting for her. "Come to bed," he said softly, holding out his hand. Hope took his hand and let him lead her to their room. As she lay beside him, feeling the warmth of his body and listening to his breathing slow into sleep. She thought once more about the journey that had brought them together. She had come west looking for her sister and found love along the way. But it was more than that. She had found herself. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed, had faced fears and overcome them, had built a life of meaning and purpose. The girl who had stood on the Leadville platform clutching a telegram, dizzy with altitude and fear, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own strength, who had earned her place in this hard land through determination and courage. And the love she had found with Quincy was the foundation on which everything else was built. Not a fairy tale romance, but something deeper and more enduring. A partnership forged in difficulty, tested by hardship, and strengthened by shared purpose. They had built a life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, and the result was something neither could have imagined alone. As Hope drifted toward sleep, she felt profoundly grateful for every step of the journey, even the painful parts. The fear she had felt searching for Hannah, the exhaustion, the disappointment, the danger, all of it had been necessary to bring her to this moment, to this life, to this love. The wind sighed through the pines outside, the same wind that had blown on her first night in these mountains. But now it sounded like a lullaby, like the voice of home welcoming her to rest. Hope closed her eyes, Quincy's steady breathing beside her, and let herself sink into the peace of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ranch would wake early, as it always did. There would be animals to tend, children to feed, work to accomplish. The seasons would turn, bringing their challenges and rewards. Her children would grow, and someday she and Quincy would watch them build their own lives, make their own choices. Hannah would continue to visit, and their bond would remain strong despite the miles between them. Life would continue in all its messy, beautiful complexity, and Hope would face it with the same courage and determination that had carried her through that first desperate search for her sister. She had learned that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined, and that lesson would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. But for now, in this perfect quiet moment, with her family safe around her and the man she loved beside her, Hope Whitmore was simply, profoundly content. She had come looking for her sister and found everything she had never known she needed. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest gift of all.